Hello, I'm Janice Stevenson, and this is Bethel Today, the program of the Bethel Democratic Town Committee. And we are meeting today with John Hartwell. He is our state senatorial candidate for the 26th district. That encompasses part of Lower Fairfield and the southern and western portions of Bethel. And John, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here this evening.
Thank you very much.
So what I'd like to do is start out this evening with talking a little bit about John's background. He was in business before getting involved and is still doing business at this time as a consultant before getting actively involved in politics. And so I guess, John, what I'd like to start with is tell me a little bit about what got you involved in looking for public office.
Well, Janice, thank you. I appreciate being on the show. I've always been interested in politics since I was a very young person. I did a political science degree in college. I came out of college and worked in several campaigns, actually starting in college, 1968 for Eugene McCarthy. I worked as a national staffer for him and traveled around the country. So I've been interested in politics all my life. I left it for a long time when I moved overseas and then came back and had small children and spent more time coaching soccer and basketball and baseball than doing political things. But since the kids have grown up and moved out, I've gotten much more actively involved. And here in Connecticut, I've done a lot of work for the Howard Dean campaign starting in 2003, 2004. I was Ned Lamont's treasurer in 2006. And I run a group called Democracy for America, which meets every month down in Norwalk. And then in 2008, I decided to get involved directly and run for office, and so I ran for state senate in 2008, and I'm back again now.
Good. And that name recognition should just be going up and up and up?
Well, we hope so, yeah.
Yeah, we do, indeed.
Everybody should be looking for those orange signs when they start to appear.
That's it. And they're going up soon, I promise.
They will be, yes.
I promise.
Good.
What I'd like to do is just start out by seeing, from your perspective, what do you see are the key issues for the state senate this time around in 2010?
Well, it's clearly a very much different world than it was 2 years ago. And it was, in fact, in the middle of that campaign that the financial services industry started to collapse.
Sure.
And we as a country looked like we were on the brink of a Great Depression. And thankfully, that hasn't come to pass. I believe that the work that the Obama administration and the Congress have done in the last couple of years has staved off a Great Depression. But we also have still, and will have for some time, a very big problem around jobs. All of us know people who've been laid off.
Yes.
All of us know people who are worried about being laid off.
True.
And it's hanging over the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of fear in many places. And when I go door to door and talking to people, I hear those stories. People who, I've got a job. It took me 8 months to get another job,
Sure.
and now I'm making $30,000 a year less than I was before.
Right.
And
right.
And I can't take the kids out for dinner. So it's not a good time for anyone. And this is reflected at the state level by the fact that we're going to be in deficit in the next fiscal year. The next budget, starting in July next year, is predicted to be around $3 billion in deficit, which is something that is not allowed at the state level.
Right.
We have to balance the budget, but we're looking at a revenue shortfall. And why is that? It's primarily because the state, in the good times, was very dependent on financial services.
Sure.
On the insurance industry up in Hartford, but more especially in the financial services industry here in Fairfield County.
Okay.
The banks, the hedge funds, all the guys who are making big bonuses. And so the income taxes in Connecticut are 40% reliant on Fairfield County. And a good portion of that actually was directly related to the bonuses in the financial services
Sure.
industry. So when the industry went south in 2008, the revenues in the state fell at the same time.
Significantly, sure.
And not only income tax, which is the biggest tax in the state, but the second biggest tax is the sales tax. And as you know, I'm sure in your family you economized.
Oh, yes.
Okay, well, everybody economizes, which means that people are spending less money,
right,
and therefore there's less sales tax coming in.
Sure.
So at the same time, of course, there's still the same amount of government that we had before. We still need to have teachers and firemen and policemen, and we need to pave the roads and provide medical services for people, and you know, all kinds of things that the government does that we usually take for granted. They're still there. So the needs for those services are still there, but the money is not coming in the same way it was before. And just like to point out that in the good times, we used to run surpluses.
Sure.
And we built up a $1.3 billion rainy day fund. But unfortunately, that's spent. And
now, was that used then to balance this last budget?
It was used to balance this last budget, along with stimulus money from the federal government,
right,
and some borrowing. So there were three pieces there that we didn't normally have to rely on to balance this year's budget, and none of those are necessarily going to be available
next year.
Next year.
Right.
Certainly the rainy day fund is gone. Stimulus money looks very doubtful. And borrowing is not a great idea, because what you're doing is borrowing against future revenues to pay for current expenditures, and
Sure.
we shouldn't be doing that.
Absolutely. What kinds of things would you like to do when you go to Hartford to turn this around? What do you envision?
Well, we have short-term problems and long-term problems.
Okay.
And the short-term problem is balancing the budget,
Right.
and it's going to be quite difficult. And my simple message is that anybody who tells you that we can simply cut our way out of this, reduce the government by 15 to 20% in one go, I don't believe it's possible.
Okay.
That's going to be, so it's going to be a big challenge to balance the budget, and so therefore taxes are not going to come down in the short run. That I can guarantee. In the long run, what we need, however, are more taxpayers rather than more taxes. And how do we get taxpayers? Well, we have people go back to work. And so I want to focus on restarting the economy here in Fairfield County. We're the economic engine for the state.
Sure.
This is where we have always produced the greatest wealth. We're next to New York City. There's plenty of opportunity there and here, and that's what we need to focus on. So bringing jobs back is the #1 priority, but that's not going to help us, you know, in the very much short run. This is a long-term plan.
Sure.
And as you may know, Connecticut over the last 20 years has had the worst job growth record in the country.
Yes, and I know that that's actually something that Dan Malloy talked about when I had him on the show recently as well.
Absolutely. Everybody knows this number, but people have different ideas about why it's the case. And again, you'll hear from some people that, oh, we're a business-unfriendly state, and oh, the taxes are too high.
Actually, I did read an op-ed piece that I think is going to be published for you this week in the Reading Pilot, and you talk about that. So I'd kind of like to address some of those myths a little bit, because I found it really very interesting. And just before we started taping tonight, John was talking about where some of the statistics he mentions come from, and I'll have him mention that as well. So let's start out with the first one, and this is directly addressing some of the things that John's opponent has actually come out and said that aren't really quite accurate. And the first is that if we cut the taxes, that it will increase revenues. And I'd like you to talk about that.
This is the most incredible myth that's going around, and it started in the Reagan administration with let's cut taxes, and business will boom, and therefore at the end of the day we'll get more revenue because there'll be more growth. If you look at what happened in the Reagan administration, they cut taxes dramatically. Revenues fell precipitously, and the total debt in the country tripled.
It more than tripled, didn't it? Wasn't it? You said it was
3.1.
Okay.
3.1.
Right.
I'll call it triple. Let's be fair. Round off here. We went from less than $1 trillion in debt as a nation to almost $3 trillion. But in those years when Ronald Reagan was in office, if you look at the second Bush administration, where we cut taxes again in a big way, debt again has soared. If you look at the Clinton administration, where we raised taxes and lost to Congress because of it, people weren't happy. But If you look, by the end of the Clinton years, the last 3 years, we had surpluses.
Right.
We were actually paying off the debt. And at one point, Alan Greenspan, at the beginning of the Bush administration, said, well, maybe we shouldn't actually pay off all the debt. That wouldn't be a good thing. Well, we're nowhere close to paying off the debt anymore. We're back in huge deficits. Now, we're also running deficits here under the Obama administration. I want to be completely honest about that. But we're doing it because we had a crisis.
Right.
And the economists said, you have to spend money now to preserve jobs. And so that's what we're doing.
Right.
Sooner or later, however, we have to get things back in balance. And right now, at the state level, we have to get things back in balance.
Sure, absolutely. I'd like to also, just another statistic that you did mention that I really thought was interesting. What was the unemployment rate in 1982?
Well, this is really interesting. Again, everybody is very concerned, rightfully so, about the unemployment rate under this administration.
Sure.
Started in the Bush administration when the economy fell apart. We're seeing the worst of it now. And so we're, what, 9.6, 9.7%. Right? If you look at the official statistics of the U.S. government, the Labor Department, at the unemployment rate in 1982, it was 9.6%. And if you look the next year in 1983, it was a similar 9.5% or so. Basically the same as it is now. But what you hear from a lot of people is, oh, the Reagan administration was so wonderful and this one is so terrible. Not true.
Right.
We go through cycles. This is a very difficult time. I don't want to soft pedal any of that. But we've been there before, and we will get out of this again. We will have jobs, we will have growth, we will have people back to work, and they'll be paying taxes, and we'll have government services that we all want and need.
Right.
So it's going to take a while. Nothing is magic. It's not going to happen overnight. But
I'm going to kind of go in a different direction from the myths a little bit and talk about some of the other things that you're very interested in supporting employment in Fairfield County. And the first of those is education. Can you talk a little bit about your approach, your thoughts about education?
Sure. Well, so many people move to this part of the state for the schools.
Sure.
And you hear that again and again in Ridgefield and in Reading and here in Bethel. People say, I moved here because of the schools, I moved here for my kids. Well, why did they do that? Because they know that a quality education is the most important factor in someone's success in life. The more educated you are and the better educated you are, the more likely you are to have a really good job and to advance. And so education is a key component. And we have to maintain strong schools. There's no doubt about that. And that means paying people, paying teachers appropriately, having administrators who are on the case and working very hard for us, and motivated parents, because parents are a key part of all of that.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't just stop in the high schools or the grade schools that we have here, which are great. We also need a strong higher education system. And we've got a pretty good one now. It's not as good as it could be. We spent a lot of money on UConn in the last few years, upgrading the plant and equipment. We need to upgrade the teaching staff, and we need to make sure that students who want to go to UConn have got the money to do it. And, and that's not necessarily the case. We lose a lot of our best young people who leave the state to go to school somewhere else, and then they don't come back. We also have, however, and I've been with these kids in Norwalk Community College, where I've been a student. You know, I go and take classes there. A lot of adults do. You see these young kids. These are kids who don't have a lot of money, and whose prospects aren't as good, and who end up staying in the state. And we need to make sure that they have the very best education possible, because they're going to be the workforce of the future in the state.
So you're saying let's beef up then the community colleges?
Absolutely. Beef them up, but at the same time focus them on areas of opportunity. So for example, in Fairfield County, and this is really what I want to talk about, jobs. We've got a very strong financial services industry. In Stanford, for example, we have RBS and UBS, we've got GE Capital, we've got hedge funds all over the place. We've got a very strong financial services industry, and that's great. And we should be focusing courses at Norwalk Community College and at the Stanford campus of UConn and at Housatonic Community College here in Danbury at
Westcon, sure.
Westcon, we should be focusing on making sure that the financial services industry has a steady supply of young people who can support them. But that's not enough. We need to diversify. If you have a personal portfolio of stocks, your portfolio advisor will say, don't put all your stocks into one, put all your money into one stock. You've got to diversify so that if something goes down here, you're protected over there. In Fairfield County, we have a tremendous opportunity in what's called new media. So internet-related, graphic arts-related, entertainment-related. And we today have lots of kids who actually live in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, and they get on the train every day and they come out to work in Stamford and Greenwich and in Norwalk. And there's already an industry developing there, but we haven't focused on it at the state level to bring resources to bear to make this really a great center.
Right.
I was talking with some venture capital people just last week, had breakfast with them to say, what would it take, because you're raising money, you're venture capitalists, you're raising money, you're investing in new businesses and startups. What would it take to have you bring those startups here to Connecticut? And I was talking to some new media people, and they said, look, it's exploding right now in New York City. In fact, one woman that I was talking to said, I moved away to the West Coast, to Silicon Valley, because nothing was happening here. I moved back. There's a tremendous amount going on in new media, in the internet world. We need to focus on it and bring the resources of the state to bear. So what does that mean? Well, it means entrepreneur classes at Norwalk Community College and maybe at the high school level.
Sure.
It means innovation centers, and there's some people trying to start one right now in Stanford where you would have shared services, you would have a community effort. You would have some people at the state level who would be out looking for funding to help you. Maybe we have a matching grant program so that the state would go from the pension funds and take some of the money from pension funds that we invest in other things and invest them in companies that are going to grow here in Connecticut.
Sure.
Now, when you do that, you have to accept that some of them are going to win and some of them are going to fail. You're going to have some failures.
Sure. But again, if you balance it...
But you have to balance it. You need people who are working on this as their business to focus the energy of the state in helping these new businesses get started.
I'm going to actually now bring back, just because we were talking about how do you support business here and how do we build business in Fairfield County, another one of the myths that your opponent has brought out is that we're an unfriendly place for business.
Right.
And what's the reality with that? Tell me what's really going on with that.
You hear that again and again and again, and then people say the taxes are too high. Well, there was a study that just came out last week from UConn, from the economists at UConn, and they looked at the manufacturing cost here in Connecticut. So manufacturing, which is something that we have seen leaving the state.
Sure.
But in fact, the cost to manufacture a product here is lower than it is in many other places. Now, that's a surprise. You wouldn't have thought that, because we hear this drumbeat of, oh, we're too expensive, oh, we're business unfriendly.
Right.
It's just not the case. And when you look at taxes at the state and local level,
two businesses.
For businesses, business taxes at the state and local level, as a percentage of what we produce. So in other words, of the capacity, we're I think 47th in the country.
Wow.
In other words, we are near the bottom in terms of business taxes.
So they are actually being taxed. What I would be interested in, you may not have this number, and we didn't talk about this, so I'm taking them off guard. I'd be very interested in knowing where we relate in terms of New York City, because we do have, UBS is here, RBS is at Stamford, they're in Fairfield County, and that's because they were offered things to bring them here, and there are a lot of people who are employed there, and indeed, some of them live in Connecticut, some don't. Obviously, it would be best to have the people in Connecticut working in Connecticut. So I would just be interested in knowing what the tax difference...
Well, our tax rates in general are much lower than New York's.
Right.
Especially for individuals like you and me. I mean, I used to commute into the city. I don't anymore. And anyone who commutes from here into the city knows that in addition to paying Connecticut tax on your income, you're also getting paid, you're paying New York taxes on your income. And that's why initially, years and years ago, companies started to move to Connecticut. GE, for example, headquartered in Fairfield. Well, they used to be in New York, but they
Sure.
came out here because of the tax situation. So we need to make sure that we stay competitive in terms of taxes. And generally, we're very competitive, especially compared with New York and with New Jersey, when we look at both business taxes and also
Good.
we look at personal taxes and property taxes.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
And property taxes, of course, is where 39% of your tax money goes, is into property taxes. It's virtually the only tax that we have at the local level to support schools.
I know.
And we're more dependent than any other state in the country on property taxes to support local government. So that's a problem.
So that would be something you'd look at. I do notice there's a lot of segue with what you're saying, and as I mentioned, I interviewed Dan Malloy recently. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts and your feelings about the mood in Hartford and what's been going on with the legislature and the governor and so on, and what you'd like to see change.
Well, everything, actually. and the good news is that most of it will change.
Yeah.
Clearly, the governor and the legislature were not able to work together very effectively.
Right.
And the budget last time was months late, and when they finally got one passed, and the governor decided to walk away and not sign it, nor did she veto it, she just let it become law without her signature. I thought that that was pretty much a low point in the running of the state. Now, we're nowhere near as bad as Albany. So,
it got a point there.
You know, if we're going to compare ourselves, regionally, we still have we
have a ways to go, but let's not go there.
We're not so, exactly,
we don't want to go in that direction.
So the good news is that with this election cycle, we're going to be changing at least 5, hopefully only 5, of the constitutional officers. I think it's 5. Governor and Lieutenant Governor.
Right.
Because Joe Durrell is going back to Brookfield. Secretary of State, Susan Beisowitz, is not running, and Denise Merrill is, and she'll be a terrific Secretary of State. Comptroller, Kevin Lembo, is running now because Nancy...
Very qualified.
Oh, he's very, very qualified. He was Assistant Controller for years under Nancy Wyman.
Right.
So, have I got everybody there? No, and Attorney General. Sorry, George Jepson is running for Attorney General because Dick Blumenthal is running for U.S. Senate. So what's going to happen here is that all of those are going to be new people in place. And we have an opportunity now to create a whole new environment in Hartford. And what I hope going forward is that instead of pointing fingers and blocking and being political, that we look at the problems, which are real, and say, what can we do? What can we do to change?
Yep.
How can we make this better? So that's what I want to do. I want to work with people to find the best solutions. And if there are Republican solutions out there, I'd be willing to talk about it.
Sure, absolutely, the compromise. We don't have very much time left, but the other issue I know that plays into the employment situation, and you did mention that for years you commuted into New York City, is mass transit in the state of Connecticut.
Yes.
Can you give me a quick blurb on that?
Sure. How much time have we got?
We're under 5 minutes at this point.
Oh, okay.
So.
All right. It's plenty of time. All right. So
we have 4 minutes, actually.
I'm on the Metro North Rail Commuter Council. I was appointed there by the president of the Senate, the state Senate. I've been on the council for a year now. And we meet every month, and we work with Metro North and with the CONDOT, the Connecticut Department of Transportation, to make sure that the railroad is running as well as possible and that we can get what improvements are possible out of it. So, for example, on the Danbury line, which I know people here are very interested in, and I am as well because it goes right down the middle of my district, we're just beginning a program now that will put in a signal system that will allow, when it's finished in a couple of years, will allow trains to run up and down at the same time.
Well, that would be great.
Right now, all the trains in the morning go down the hill, and at the nighttime, all the trains come back up the hill.
Right.
And so what does that mean? If you had a business here in Bethel, and you wanted to hire someone from Bridgeport, and that person wanted to take the train,
they really can't.
They can't, unless you're okay with them showing up at 10 in the morning instead of 9.
And even I looked into doing it because I have been working in New Haven.
Right.
Trying to commute by train to New Haven is also a nightmare.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, you know, when you make investments in transportation, they last for 100 years.
Yes.
Sometimes 150 years. The main line that goes through Westport, where I live, was laid in the 1860s.
Yep.
Well, that's 150 years ago. We're still enjoying the benefits of it today. And it requires a lot of investment. Now, Jody Rell led the way in buying new rail cars, and those new rail cars are starting to arrive. They have, I think, 8 in the state now. They're in testing. They'll be in revenue service by the end of the year. When the program's up and running to its fullest degree, we'll be getting 10 new cars a month, 300 cars in all. She wants to buy 80 more. I fully support that. We need a strong rail transportation system. That's the other piece, by the way. For businesses, the 2 most important things are an educated workforce that they can draw upon, and a transportation system that allows their customers to come in, their employees to come in, their suppliers to come in. That's what we need. And anybody who drives on I-95, which is right next to me, or I-84, you know, knows that we've got a problem.
Nightmare. And the Merit.
And the Merit. The Merit was designed for 22,000 cars a day going 55 miles an hour. We now have 60,000 cars a day going 70 miles an hour.
Absolutely.
It's a zoo.
It is a zoo, and the minute anything goes wrong, it's over.
It's over.
Over.
That's right.
It could happen all the way down in Stamford, and that's it.
Yeah.
And we have just been given our 1-minute warning. So this has been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed having you come in, John.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoy being up here. And, you know, I'm going to be back in Bethel a lot over the next couple of months. So you'll see me around. I'm going to be at the Halloween thing for sure.
Okay, great.
I've been at the picnics, the town party picnics, and I'm going to be here.
Good. Just in terms of the Halloween thing, I know it's many weeks away, but my children have started thinking about their costumes. That'll be Trick or Treat Street, which is traditionally the Saturday before Halloween, and we are always there. That is the Democrats. We're out giving away candy.
Which is also the Saturday before the election.
Yes, it is. And that's major. So this is Bethel Today. I'm getting signals that are making me stutter. So this is Bethel Today. I'm Janice Stevenson. Our guest today was John Hartwell. He is the state senatorial candidate for the 26th district, and that is Bethel and Ridgefield, and I believe Reading and Westport and parts of Weston, I think.
And Wilton and New Canaan.
And New Canaan.
Yes.
All right. And thank you very much. Good night.